Today, we are talking about IEPs. One of the things that a lot of people think is that in order to have an IEP, you have to enroll in the public school. And that's not actually true. Anyone can make an IEP. The problem is that an IEP is required to be followed by the public school district. Like federally, they are required to follow the IEP. If they do not, they can get into legal trouble. A private school and a homeschool are not required to follow the IEP by law. But that doesn't mean we can't make one and use it to advocate for our kids. And an IEP is a very important document because it gives us legal teeth to be able to advocate for our children. One of the big ones is when we come to ACT, SAT testing. If our kids need accommodations, you want to get accommodations, an IEP is your ticket to accommodations. So as homeschoolers or as a private schooler, you can actually create your own IEP. You still have to have somebody sign off on it who is, knowledgeable. Whether for my membership, which the link is in the comments, I sign off on IEPs for parents all the time. When I did my own kids, I couldn't sign off on my own kids' IEP, so I had all of their therapists sign off on it, and that worked out just fine. So we can make those IEPs. We want to include testing information. That's why with my membership, we do yearly testing. That way you have testing data going back that we can pull from when we need it, and then not come up scrambling at the end going, oh no, we need testing data. We don't have testing data. Now we have to do the testing. Then we have to make the documentation. So it allows us to collect information as we go. It also helps us to know if there's a problem before it becomes a big hairy deal. Because a lot of times there are smaller signs that are visible earlier. And if we can catch those small signs early, then we can course correct before we end up with a big problem. So ongoing testing is useful in general, but not just for an IEP. IEPs are extremely important. This is how we get accommodations when we need accommodations in college. It is not how you get accommodations in a workplace or any other environment other than education. An IEP is strictly for educational purposes. If you want accommodations in a workplace or any other kind of environment, then you're going to want a 504 plan. 504 plan is covered under the Americans with Disabilities Americans with Disabilities Act. The IEP is covered under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Both cover disabilities. One's focused on education, the other one is focused on just life in general. You can use a 504 in an educational setting, but it is generally speaking used for non-academic issues. So if you want accommodations on a test because you have challenges academically in some way, then, or challenges that impact you academically in some way, then you're going to want an IEP. Good news is, I just came out with a boost packet that's on this entire topic. It's called Transitional Planning, Testing, IEPs, and Transcripts. It starts out talking about testing data because you need testing data to create an IEP. But also it's helpful because it goes through and explains how do we interpret test scores. What information is helpful in helping us take those test scores and then translate them into something practical in the IEP. Like what kind of accommodations are we looking for, those kinds of things. Then you have the section on advocating by writing an IEP, and my daughter was extremely gracious and let me include her IEP in this book. So you have her IEP, test scores, and signing. And there's also a template that you can use to make your own. Currently it's filled out for Oscar the Grouch, which I thought was very entertaining. And then the last section is creating a plan and transcript, and that includes templates for creating a transcript, but it also includes information for helping your child create a transition plan, because a lot of times when we're talking about IEPs, especially as kids get older, we are also talking about transitional planning because that becomes part of the IEP process. And transitional planning, we need to understand who this child is, so testing information can be very useful here. We also need to, beyond understanding who this child is, we need to hear what their thoughts are, what's their personality, what kinds of jobs might be satisfying to them. How do we help them build a life they love? This book also has a link to a course I taught called Building a Life You Love, helping kids with career planning. And it also included a class on building a resume, because part of that transitional process for teenagers is figuring out what they want to do with their lives, what they will be comfortable doing with their lives, but then also trying to present the written them well, and that's what a resume is all about. And that's really important, because a lot of us that are neurodivergent take a rather different path when it comes to the rest of our lives. We don't tend to always follow the traditional path of, okay, we're going to graduate, we're going to college for 4 years, or we're going to trade school, and then we're going to get a job. Usually we take a little bit more of a circuitous path. And that's also why an IEP is so important. You want accommodations in college, you need an IEP. You want accommodations in trade school, you need an IEP. Basically, if you want any kind of accommodations, you need an IEP. But you do not have to get this from the public school. You can make your own if you're a private schooler or a homeschooler. You are not legally required to follow it. However, I find that generally speaking, most homeschool parents are going to follow their own IEP. And I also find that most private schools will as well, as long as it's a reasonable IEP, because they want to keep your student, because that's how they get paid. So generally speaking, I find that they tend to be fairly cooperative. You do not, there is no reason that you have to enroll in the public school to get an IEP. It is not required at all. And there is nothing that they can offer you that you cannot get through other means, especially with my membership, which the link is in the comments, because my membership takes care of a lot of the ongoing testing that you might want to have, because colleges, ACT, SAT, College Board, all of those people that work in education, they understand public school. They don't understand private school or homeschool. And so what we do needs to kind of match what the public school is doing, so that we can communicate effectively to them what we want and why we need it, and be able to advocate for our children. So having ongoing testing at least once every 3 years, being able to create an IEP that documents our child's history and what accommodations we give them at home, all of those things are very important. And it's really not very hard to do. A lot of times it sounds kind of intimidating, especially if you're coming from an education background, because once they started making IEPs, you know, somebody came along and they created a computer program to help you make an IEP, to simplify it by just checking boxes, which, FYI, doesn't work, because then it's no longer individualized. An IEP is an individualized education plan. And if we're just clicking boxes and auto-generating accommodations, that's not individualized. But it's really not that difficult to create once you have a template anyways. It's just a matter of including those test scores, making sure we're talking about what accommodations we need. And I have never had any problems getting a child accommodations where needed by using a homeschool IEP. So there you go. It can be done. Thanks for joining me, and we will be back to talk about something else next time. In the meantime, you might check out the Transitional Planning Boost Packet, testing, IEPs, and transcripts. It includes a lot of great information there, and it can even be useful for kids when they're younger. Not so much for the kids, but for the parents, so that we kind of know, where are we going? Like, what's our long-term plan here? So, at any rate, thanks for joining me today.